Hello, welcome to Unsilenced. My name is Shelby Smith. I'm here tonight with Ashley M.
So my name's Ashley, as Shelby said, and I'm 20 years old. I live in South Carolina. I had a VCUG performed on me when I was 2 years old. I was taken to a room. My pants and underwear were removed, and I was placed on this table and told to lie down. There were a lot of large machines around me and adults standing over my body. The VCUG, it ruined my life. It turned my childhood very dark. I became a very mute and anxious child. I was terrified of any people in authority. I remember standing in preschool and I was just screaming, standing there. I didn't want anyone to come near my body. I remember yelling at my mom, threatening to kill the preschool teacher if she came near me. I have a lot of disturbing memories that I won't go into of ways of how I was trying to cope with this test that happened. And those are memories that still, it's hard for me to carry alone, knowing that I was so desperately trying to cope with what happened as a child. I believed that I was broken. I believed that at any point, someone can just violate my body, and that when they do, I just have to deal with it. I have to just let it happen, because if not, I'm going to be held down. Growing up, I felt so broken and defective and violated all the time that those feelings completely derailed my life. And those bodily sensations that I relived every day from the procedure is what led me to starving myself when I was 14. I just wanted to die. I didn't want to exist anymore. I wanted to feel like I had some control over my body, and so I decided to restrict. I ended up at an eating recovery center as a result of that. I just remember going into therapy, begging these therapists, like, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my body. Like, can you please help me figure it out? And I just remember I would go into their office just sobbing and just breaking down, that there's seriously something wrong. And I couldn't put a finger on what that was. Years later, I met another therapist and we worked together for about a year or so. And again, I would come in just crying and saying, like, what is wrong with me? Like, there's something so wrong. And she wanted me to write down how my body feels with my left hand. I'm right-handed. The left hand is controlled by the right side of our brain, which holds like trauma memories. And so I did that every day until we met again, and I handed her the paper. I had written, it looked like a kid wrote it because it was with my left hand. I felt like I had been sexually abused. And I handed her that paper. I said, here, and I put my head down. I didn't want to look at her. I didn't want to make eye contact. And she looked at me again. She said, Ashley, like, I know I've already asked you this, but have you ever been sexually abused as a child? And I said, no, there's no way. Like, I don't remember anything, like, there isn't anything. And then there was a long pause. And then there was one memory that came back. I was like, well, there was this one time, it wasn't sexual abuse, but there was one time where, you know, it's hard to talk about it and go into it, but basically at age 5, I had an external pelvic exam done on me as a result of what they did to me during the procedure when I was 2. When I was 2, during that procedure, they tore my vagina. And so I needed to have an external pelvic exam just to make sure that everything was okay with my body. That was the first memory that came back. I remember when I was 5, that vivid memory of, she asked me to remove my pants and underwear and lay down on the table and spread my legs. And then I just have the vivid memories of her cold hands on my genitals. And I remember in that moment feeling like my body did not belong to me. I felt like there were I couldn't get any words to come out to say, no, I didn't want you to do that. And obviously she was doing an exam as a result of what these people did to me when I was 2. But that was a memory that was repressed that I kept in this little box in my brain with all the rest of the memories. When that memory came back, I remember starting feeling really dizzy. That is all I remember for the 3 days after. I don't know how I even drove home after that moment. I was completely depersonalized in a daze for 3 days straight. It was all a blur. And the next session I showed up, and obviously she's like, do you remember what happened last session? And I was just mute. I don't even know. Words can't even describe it. I told her, I think something else happened before when I was 5. That's what's causing all of this. And I got the courage to call my mom, who at the time was out of the country. And I asked her, which was really hard to do, but I asked her, like, did anything else happen before I was 5? And she said, yeah. She said, you had this procedure that was, she said, it was inhumane what they did to you. She said, you were screaming and crying, and they had to put your legs in devices and restrain you. And she said, I screamed at the doctor, begging them to stop what they were doing to you. She said they began to blackmail her and tell her that if they do not do this, that they will be contacting CPS. They told her that if she doesn't bring me back for another VCUG, that I would die without another VCUG, which was a blatant lie. I had severe VUR, severe, and I lived without another VCUG. It resolved on its own. I know that is not everyone's story. I know that some people do have VUR that is severe that needs treatment. VCUGs are not treatments, they're purely diagnostic, and no child should have their vagina torn in the process.
I had the same exact experience at every single medical appointment I've been to. And it's that feeling of, I do not want anyone touching me, and I would fight to the death to not let them. And then feeling really confused about why, and never having an answer until also October 2022, when I found out and had an identical conversation on the phone with my mom too.
Crying, hyperventilating, the same thing I said. I was 4. I was 4.
Yes.
I wasn't able to make friends as a child. I struggled with connections with people. I would, make a friend one day, and then the next day I would come home from school and my mom would be like, well, how was it playing with your new friend? And I would say, what friend? Connections just didn't happen, and I just isolated myself. I didn't trust anyone. I had huge trust issues with people, and obviously my parents. I think another huge thing when I was growing up was the fear of car rides. I did not want to get in the car no matter what. I was determined not to get in the car unless I knew exactly where we were going. And even then, I would be in the car sick to my stomach because I didn't want it to happen again. My mom tried to take me to therapy when I was 6 years old because she realized how traumatizing this was, what happened to me. I was 6 years old, and I didn't want to get out of the car. I screamed and kicked and cried, and I did not want to get out of the car. And then she begged the therapist to come out to the car to meet me there, and she wouldn't. And she paid thousands of dollars trying to find all these therapists, but I would not get out of the car. I did not want my body to be violated again.
Even as a kid, you were still able to make that connection, which is, hey, this is something to do with this thing in my life that I don't want to think about, I don't want to deal with. I'm not risking it. Literally so horrible to think that a child therapist would not come outside to meet an upset, distressed child.
My mom was pissed. Also, when I was a child, I had a lot of sensory processing issues. I couldn't stand the texture of certain clothing against my body. And that is an issue that I struggled with severely, was those body memories so vivid. I couldn't even bear to have certain clothing on my body, and that affected me a lot as a child. I also developed a lot of body focused repetitive behaviors as a child. I would pick at my nails a lot. I'd get so many infections, which ironically ended up meaning I had to go back to the doctors as a child, which just re-traumatized me. And I would pick at my skin so much that the bottom of my heels would be bleeding. I would walk around literally limping. It's just an anxiety-based behavior. And I remember just sobbing because it hurt so bad, but I couldn't stop myself. And then it almost just became a self-harm. I began self-harming after the eating recovery center. My parents were watching what I was eating, and so I obviously couldn't starve myself anymore. So I moved on to cutting. I would cut so much to the point of almost needing stitches. I hated my body because my body felt so broken, and no one could help me figure it out. I felt so violated all the time. That was one of the worst things from this, is just feeling violated all the time. When I was 13, I'd have these sketches in my notebook of diagrams, trying to just put onto paper how it felt every time I saw my parents, because they were involved in the procedure. Every time I see them, I relive those disturbing, torturous agonizing bodily sensations, those feelings of being violated, like I became very suicidal. I did not want to live anymore in a body that felt so defective and broken.
I really appreciate you leaning into like the outcomes, which were way out of your hands, and talking about how trauma does impact the brain and the body together, like whether you want it to or not. So like it's very intriguing to me to think that the skin picking evolved into something else because they took away your coping mechanism, which was the disordered eating. That is something I struggled with greatly. And it was the same case when my parents started micromanaging my diet. It was just, I was constantly upset and constantly self-harming, and it was horrible. It's like we're simply asking for the answer to all of our life problems, and instead we're getting micromanaged and dismissed. It
was hell living in those teenage years. I was really good at putting a mask on and making it seem like everything's fine from the outside. But man, the second everyone would go to sleep in the house and I was alone in my room, I would have panic attacks, dissociate, self-harm, and then it was just this endless cycle for years. It repeated itself. I think initially when these repressed memories kind of came back, obviously there was a lot of hurt and anger and sadness, confusion. There were a lot of emotions. That younger part of me was so angry at mom, because like any toddler would, how could you do this to me? But my mom was blackmailed and lied to about all of this. Understanding that now, like she's been very supportive of me healing from this trauma and recognizing that it was very traumatizing. She also recognizes that they sexually abused me in that room. They tore my vagina, which was not supposed to happen. They restrained me in devices. And then, I just replay my mom screaming back at them over and over in my head, and how terrible that must have been to be in her position as a young parent. It was rough growing up. I was always the problem child. I was the one that had all the anger issues within the family that would take it out on my family. I would hit and kick and bite anyone that would come near me. I didn't want anyone near my body. Every doctor's appointment that I was dragged to, I would threaten to kill anyone in the room. There was one doctor's appointment when I was like 7 years old and I refused to get out of the car, that the doctors actually came out to the car, and I was smiling and laughing because if I was sick, something bad's gonna happen to me. And so my mom was like mad and so frustrated because I was really sick and she was trying to get me help, but I wouldn't let them help me because in my head, getting help is
the same as what happened. Yeah.
When you're 2 years old and your mom is involved in something like that, in a child's mind, all that child is thinking is, why won't mom save me? Why won't mom rescue me? A child cannot understand anything except the fact that this hurts, I'm in pain, this is scary, and nobody's saving me. Nobody is. That stuck with me in those very important, like, developmental years. Sounds like it just derailed your relationship with your parents through no fault of either party. Neither of you were equipped to deal with this without resources and knowledge that you didn't have. Right. You can't get that back. And that's what's hard, is dealing with that permanent damage that you can't go back and change. And it's really sad. And it's sad for both me and my mom. It hurts her too. So it's no secret, or we're hoping to make it less of a secret, that this test results in comparable trauma to a violent rape, especially in little girls, meaning that a lot of children experience this test as sexually abusive. And I appreciate you touching already on how children perceive things versus adults. That's very important to keep in mind, and I would encourage viewers to do so. That said, with the knowledge you have now, what is one thing that you really want to communicate to the medical community at this point in your life? To the people that conduct VCUGs, how does it feel to take a child's clothes off, place them on a table, pry their legs open with devices, people holding them down as they scream and cry, and forcibly penetrate their genitals? That's what I would ask them. And if they don't like the words that I used, I would have them break down the definitions for me, because that is exactly what happens on that table when VCUGs are performed to children. It is legally sanctioned child sexual abuse. It is disgusting and evil. The younger part of me that had this done to her, if she could say anything, it would just be to just stop performing them. It's terrible. It is absolutely terrible. And honestly, the words "just stop" are like the one thing that I just want to like almost yell. VCUGs are a diagnostic test. If you have VUR, it doesn't treat it. Treatment would be something like surgery, in which case you'd be under general anesthesia for. For me personally, it's not medically necessary because there are other measures available, and parents have been lied to about that for decades.
We can say that confidently now, knowing that CVIS is not only comparable, it's better, and it's safer, and it's radiation free. And there's no excuse for any hospital to not be offering it, let alone not informing parents.
It doesn't matter what medical test is being done, what scenario a child is in, or adult, or anything. Under no circumstance should a child forcibly have any part of their genitals penetrated. The doctor that was doing it told my mom she won't remember. If I could go back and look him in the eyes and tell him that my body vividly remembers and it was torture, I wish I could go back and do that. It doesn't matter if you're 2 years old, the body remembers. The body remembers. And my body counts.
Do you have any sort of thoughts on why there's been such a lack of effort on part of healthcare organizations to replace this test after decades of use?
From the research and stuff, the VCUG test is more expensive than a lot of these other tests. And so I believe a lot of it is based off of money. I believe there are child predators out there performing these tests. You know, children have these tests done not only once, but sometimes like dozens of times. That makes me sick thinking about that, of why would a child need to have this happen to them that many times. I think the healthcare industry in general is disgusting when it comes to the financial side of things. They just lie to the public. There are so many lies. There was a situation I was talking with a pediatric nurse. She was a newer nurse, and she was telling me how she did her preceptorship at a children's radiology place. Just started talking to me about some of the tests that they were doing, and I was already starting to get hot flashes because I felt like I knew where this was going. She said, yeah, there was this one procedure that we do on these kids, and we would have to like strap them down and hold them down as they screamed, and it was just terrible. I said, was it called a VCUG? And she was like, oh yeah, like that's what it was. And then there was kind of this pause, and I said, what was it like being in that room when children had that procedure? Her face just kind of dropped, and she looked at me dead in the eye, and she said, it was terrible. It felt like we were molesting those kids. That has stuck with me for a long time.
Just the fact that, you know, doctors are actually, many of them are taught in medical school that it is a traumatic procedure, and we don't know how much detail they might go into, but the fact that this has been, you know, given as information to healthcare professionals for quite some time does raise eyebrows. If you were to share perhaps the worst outcome of this procedure on your life, what would that be? I
think the worst outcome of this procedure was simply just the trauma of it and living with complex PTSD, the vivid, torturous bodily sensations that I relived every single day and still to this day in nightmares, the flashbacks, the dissociation, the feeling broken and defective all the time, and also the attachment issues that came with this because I was 2 years old. It was just debilitating, and it just completely derailed my life. And honestly, those bodily sensations is something that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It is torturous. It's sad how suicidal I became as a result of this test. You know, I was trying to kill myself when I was 14. Every single day since I was 14, I didn't want to live. I made a lot of suicide plans of how I would end my life. The day before I turned 20, I remember sitting in my room. I had a handful of a lot of pills that I was going to take, that I did the calculations and I was for sure they would kill me. I had them in my hand and I was ready to take them and to be done. I didn't want to turn 20 the next day because I didn't want to live another year having to endure these torturous bodily sensations. And in my head, I just thought, well, if I could just kill myself, it would just finally be over. It would be over. You know, I didn't that night, obviously, but a few days later, I ended up going to a residential treatment facility, and even my trying to drive up to the treatment facility, I was pulled over on the side of the road, convinced that the next time I put my car in drive, I am ending my life. I was there for a month, and I think that's what ultimately made a turning point of this whole journey because, it's been years and years, my whole life, of having these severe mental health issues. Wasn't sure where they were coming from. And then the eating recovery center when I was 14, and it just therapy for 7 years. None of it made sense. But since that terrible day in October where these memories came back, from October to April, it was just hell. I feel like I was dissociated pretty much every day of that time period. While I was at residential, I learned that I'm not broken, and that what happened to me was wrong, and it should not happen to any other little girl or boy. I learned to trust myself more. It was really sad how much this procedure just broke me. I remember being in residential, and I remember just breaking down with one of the therapists there because I couldn't even get myself to stand up and walk across the room. My body felt so broken. I was at this treatment facility literally having to relearn how to be human again. It's hard, the amount of time that you lose dissociating, and I think that's something that people don't talk about that much. When someone dissociates, and obviously it's different for everyone, but I can't talk, and so it's hard when someone's asking what's wrong? It's just a blank stare. My body was trying to, protect me from what was happening as we mentally removed ourselves from this inescapable terror that we endured.
I remember one of the first studies I found that made me more comfortable talking about my journey with self-harm, especially on TikTok and other public platforms, was this really interesting article about how dissociation is actually a mediating factor in self-harm and vice versa. So these two things are very interwoven and very dependent, working very dependently with each other to create these things. And so I'm just very encouraged by women like you who are also choosing now to stand up and say what this is, if that makes sense, because self-harm has been a common thread among VCUG survivors.
A lot of us, depending on what age we had the VCUG done at, some of us don't have an explicit memory, but we have those vivid body memories. And so growing up, being so confused of where these body memories are coming from, I was trying to match how I felt on the inside to the outside. And so if I could cut myself, that hurt matched the hurt that I felt on the inside. And so it matched and it made sense. And I think that's what it is for a lot of survivors as well. Just trying to make sense of something because your body feels so broken, but you can't define, you can't
know what you don't know. And for us, not having the memory of the procedure, we don't know that. So how on earth are we supposed to put the dots together, And you're right about the bodily sensations. Every time you mention that phrase, my heart sinks because I think that would have to be the hardest part for me since October as well, is the bodily sensations. How do I make them stop? Self-harm was a very good option. As harmful as it was, it did work. And it created that negative feedback loop, which just gets us deeper and deeper in our trauma. I especially like the way you described wanting it to match. On the inside, I read something that said people who engage in self-interest behaviors are typically either doing one of two things. They're either one, trying to feel something because they're too numb and they want to make sure they're real, or they're doing it to make the overwhelming sensation stop. So it's one of the two, and that just really resonated with me.
Yeah, those bodily sensations that are so horrible. I can't even lie on my back without reliving all of these. It takes a toll on every aspect of your life. Every time you change your clothes, you relive those traumatizing events. Every time you lay down on your back, you relive those traumatizing events. Every time you go to the bathroom, you relive those traumatizing events because you were forced to urinate on a table surrounded by adults as you were restrained and now soaking in a pile of your own urine, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
Traumatizing things that happened, we relive every single day, and it's hard navigating life when it seems like everywhere you turn, it's almost a trigger of what happened.
Yeah, for me especially, the feeling that seemed to haunt me throughout life was just this feeling of being so trapped, and no matter how hard I ran or how far I ran, and I was a runner for a stupid amount of time, and everyone would say how can you do 8 miles a day? And it's I don't know, now I know. It's that feeling stayed in my body of being pinned down and something was taken from me. My physical brain could not comprehend how, in a way. It's well, that couldn't have happened. We couldn't have been that stripped of our bodily autonomy, that stripped of our agency. And to think that this is treated as such a lighthearted, minimally invasive procedure is beyond me.
It's hard to carry that because, you would think whatever happened to us as children, you picture that happening to an adult. It's like that would never happen. You would never pin down a screaming adult and shove something in their genitals during a medical test, ever. You would never do that. As a child, I showed every sign of child sexual abuse, but it was very obvious. There were a lot of red flags that were missed. I don't know if I can ever get myself to go to the doctors again. Even saying that word out loud sends chills down my spine. I haven't shared with any medical professional because I quite honestly don't think I'll ever put myself in a position to be able to share with them because I distance myself.
Which makes total sense. And even speaking to the girls that have confided in a healthcare professional they trusted, it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of stories like the one you just told, and that's not something every VCUG survivor is equipped to handle at certain parts of their journey. And I feel like the double whammy for us is not only do we get the paralyzing fear from childhood of I was a toddler and this happened to me and that could happen again. But then you have the rational adult brain saying, no one's going to believe you. You're going to be dismissed, invalidated. You're going to be a joke. They're going to make fun of you. And then you have your inner critic attacking you in adulthood. And it's what are we supposed to do? No one's helping us.
Yeah, right. And then it's we go to the doctors. We know as adults, we can protect ourselves now, but we'll dissociate now.
Can we actually do?
Yeah.
That's what PTSD does, though. Theoretically, we couldn't even protect ourselves if we had to. That could happen. That's a possibility when PTSD is keeping you in child mode and suddenly you can't talk. And it's well, there goes the adult capability.
I feel like a little kid again.
It's a little ridiculous that we're sitting here having this interview, right? And we're not showing compassion to kids because we are those kids. And now as adults, we're also not getting compassion as adults and we are those adults. And it's what do we have to do? What do we have to do around here to be taken seriously? The avoidance of medical care is I'd say the primary theme.
As a child, every time my mom would say we're going to the doctor, I would threaten to kill her. I would threaten to kill the doctors. When I was a teenager, I became verbally attacking every medical professional in the room. My mom literally would have to take me out at times because they could just ask me, how are you? And I would verbally attack them and go off and just don't come near me. It was really bad. And it was all obviously in an effort of me feeling like I needed to protect myself.
Yeah. I read a survivor story yesterday about a girl who is terrified of all bald men because her doctor was bald. I know I just interviewed Ashley G. She saw her first teacher in school looked like the doctor did the VCUG and she screamed at him. And these things are just treated as one-off occasions in a way. They're oh, there's been kids. In reality, it's no, this kid needs help. And that kid can't tell you that because they're a kid. I'm not sure when it was I connected with you. We connected on Reddit really early on.
I think February is when we connected. When I got back and realized you guys did a Zoom meeting, I was no, I missed it.
Well, you made it just in time. You're a co-founder here at Unsilenced, and we're so lucky to have you. And I just remember smiling when I was messaging you because I was really scared to be messaging a stranger, even a survivor.
Honestly, it was incredible. I don't know. I honestly don't even have words for how amazing it was to connect with other people that finally experienced the same thing I did and could relate and more than just the trauma, but with everything else that, we tried to do to cope with the trauma. I felt alone for so long, my whole life. I was just this broken, defective girl. I was just so confused and so alone. It was this loneliness that is honestly hard to describe, but connecting with other survivors of this was the first time in my life I finally didn't feel alone. It was overwhelming knowing that this has happened to so many other women.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to have met the women that I have met because I quite honestly would not be alive if I did not have them and their support and encouragement as we're all trying to heal from this trauma.
I've said those exact words multiple times. I hope they're in some videos somewhere because those women saved my life too. First of all, we've gotten a lot of hate. However, we've also gotten a lot of support and praise and recognition for what we're doing in terms of helping other survivors heal and find community or even just realize what happened to them in the first place. If you could share one piece of advice with other women, what advice would you share with them?
At the beginning of this healing journey, you just have to have a lot of patience with yourself and a lot of self-compassion because it's very overwhelming finding all this out or having the memories come back or finally realizing where all this came from is very, very overwhelming. And so I think the first thing I would say to anyone else that's struggling with this is just take time for yourself. Honestly, spend time with that younger version of yourself, that little you that was so violently hurt, do things that, she would want to do, say things to her that she would want to hear, journal to her, write letters to her. That's something that's been really helpful in my healing journey. It's called IFS, Internal Family Systems. I think connecting with that younger version of yourself that has felt so isolated was super helpful in the beginning parts of my healing journey, because everything felt so scattered. And I know that's at the beginning such an overwhelming feeling, but man, if I could just tell another survivor, the one thing that I would say: you are not broken. You never were broken. You're not alone. It's not your fault what happened. It is not your fault what happened.